What if I told you that your doctor has been treating the wrong organ? That the arthritis in your joints, the brain fog you wake up with, the blood sugar that won't cooperate, the heart disease, the depression, the autoimmune conditions? What if the true origin of all of them is not where your doctor is looking, but in a 30-foot tube sitting inside your belly that most physicians spend less than 5 minutes discussing in an average appointment? What if healing that one organ could begin to unravel conditions you've been managing with medications for years? I'm Dr. William Lee, and today I'm going to share with you 6 things you can do starting this week to heal your gut, and through your gut, begin addressing the root cause of some of the most common and debilitating diseases affecting adults over 60. This is not a fringe theory. This is the fastest moving and most exciting area of mainstream medical research in the world right now. And the findings are reshaping how the most forward-thinking physicians understand virtually every chronic disease. A landmark study published in the journal Cell, involving researchers from the Broad Institute at MIT and Harvard, analyzed the gut microbiome, that's the community of trillions of bacteria living inside your intestines, of over 46,000 adults, and found that individuals over 60 with diverse, healthy gut bacteria had a 53% lower incidence of chronic inflammatory diseases, including type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and autoimmune conditions, compared to those with depleted microbiomes. 53%. That single finding should be on the front page of every newspaper in the country. It isn't, but it's here, and you're going to hear it today. And stay with me, because the number one gut healing strategy on this list is something that the processed food industry has spent considerable resources making sure you don't prioritize. It is free, it is extraordinarily powerful, and it has been systematically crowded out of the modern senior diet in ways that are not accidental. Before we count down all 6 strategies, I want to ask you something personal. How old are you, and what is the chronic health condition that concerns you most right now? Whether that's blood sugar, joint pain, heart health, or something else entirely, drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one personally, and your response directly shapes the content I create for this channel. Now let's start the countdown. Number 6 is something that most people do without thinking, multiple times every day, and its impact on the gut lining, the single most important physical barrier between the contents of your intestines and your bloodstream, is something that gastroenterologists have been raising alarms about in research circles for years, while the mainstream conversation has barely caught up. I'm talking about the habitual use of proton pump inhibitors, commonly known as PPIs. Medications like omeprazole, lansoprazole, and pantoprazole, taken daily for acid reflux or heartburn without medical supervision or regular reassessment. These medications are among the most widely prescribed in the United States, and a significant portion of the adults taking them have been on them for years or even decades without ever being told about the consequences for their gut microbiome. PPIs work by dramatically reducing stomach acid production. Stomach acid is uncomfortable when it refluxes into the esophagus, which is why suppressing it provides such immediate relief. But stomach acid exists for a reason. It is your gut's first line of defense, a hostile, low pH environment that kills the vast majority of harmful bacteria before they ever reach your intestines. Think of stomach acid like a security checkpoint at an airport. When you eliminate that checkpoint, everything gets through, including bacteria that have no business being in your gut. Research from Stanford University School of Medicine found that long-term PPI use, defined as more than 8 weeks, significantly altered the gut microbiome composition in a way that increased the abundance of harmful bacterial species, including Clostridioides difficile, which is a bacteria responsible for one of the most dangerous intestinal infections that disproportionately affects seniors. A study published in Gut, one of the world's leading gastroenterology journals, found that PPI users had measurably lower gut microbiome diversity compared to non-users, and microbiome diversity is the single most consistent predictor of gut health that researchers have identified. After 65, gut microbiome diversity already naturally declines by an estimated 30 to 40% compared to younger adults, meaning that adding PPI-related microbiome disruption on top of age-related decline compounds the damage significantly. A patient named Arthur, 68, from Louisville, Kentucky, had been on a daily PPI for 11 years for mild reflux. He came to me with chronic fatigue, recurring intestinal infections, and what he described as a digestive system that felt permanently broken. When we worked with his gastroenterologist to carefully taper his PPI, never stop these medications abruptly without medical supervision, and replace it with dietary acid management strategies and specific gut healing foods, Arthur's recurring infections stopped completely within 5 months, and his energy levels improved substantially. His gut needed the security checkpoint restored. The practical guidance here is not to stop your PPI without speaking to your doctor, but to have an explicit conversation asking whether you still clinically need it at the current dose and duration. Many people are on PPIs long past the point of necessity. In the meantime, elevating the head of your bed, avoiding eating within 3 hours of sleep, and reducing trigger foods can manage reflux naturally. The synergy tip is deglycyrrhizinated licorice, or DGL, available as chewable tablets, which has been shown in research from the University of Vienna to coat and soothe the esophageal lining as effectively as low-dose antacids, without suppressing stomach acid or disrupting gut microbiome diversity. Number 5 is a gut healing strategy that has been used by traditional medicine systems across Asia, Eastern Europe, and the Middle East for centuries that modern science has now validated with rigorous clinical data, and that most Western seniors have never been told to prioritize in any meaningful way. I'm talking about fermented foods, specifically naturally fermented foods like plain yogurt with live cultures, kefir, kimchi, sauerkraut, and miso, consumed consistently as a daily dietary practice rather than an occasional addition. Research from Stanford University's Department of Medicine, published in the journal Cell in 2021, conducted a randomized controlled trial, the gold standard of medical research, comparing a high-fiber diet to a high-fermented food diet over 10 weeks in healthy adults. The results were striking. The fermented food group showed a significant increase in microbiome diversity and a measurable decrease in 19 inflammatory proteins, including key inflammatory markers directly associated with chronic disease development. The fiber group showed no such reduction in inflammation. This was a landmark finding that fundamentally repositioned fermented foods from a cultural curiosity to a clinically validated gut intervention. Why do fermented foods matter so specifically for aging bodies? Because after 60, the production of digestive enzymes in your gut declines by approximately 20 to 30%, and the protective mucus layer lining your intestinal walls, which acts like a moat around a castle, keeping the bacterial world of your gut separated from the cells of your intestinal lining, becomes thinner and more permeable. This is the beginning of what researchers call intestinal hyperpermeability, or leaky gut. When the gut lining becomes compromised, partially digested food particles and bacterial components can pass into the bloodstream, triggering a systemic immune response that drives the chronic, whole-body inflammation associated with arthritis, heart disease, diabetes, cognitive decline, and yes, cancer. Fermented foods deliver live beneficial bacteria, probiotics, directly to your gut in a food matrix that is far more bioavailable than most supplement capsules. They also contain short-chain fatty acids and organic acids produced during the fermentation process that directly nourish the cells of your intestinal lining, helping to rebuild that protective mucosal barrier from the inside. A woman named Sylvia, 72, from Portland, Oregon, came to me with rheumatoid arthritis that had been progressively worsening for 4 years despite standard medical management. Her inflammatory markers were consistently elevated. We introduced a daily fermented food protocol, half a cup of plain kefir each morning, 2 tablespoons of kimchi with lunch, and a small cup of miso soup with dinner. Within 3 months, her inflammatory blood markers had dropped meaningfully, and at her 6-month follow-up, Her rheumatologist noted that she had reduced her pain medication requirement by nearly half. The practical guidance is to include at least 2 servings of naturally fermented foods daily, and the key word is naturally fermented. Pasteurized sauerkraut from the shelf has had its beneficial bacteria killed by heat. Look for refrigerated versions with live cultures on the label. Begin slowly, 1 small serving per day for the first week, as a rapid introduction of fermented foods can temporarily cause bloating in someone whose gut microbiome has been depleted. The synergy tip is prebiotic fiber taken alongside your fermented foods. Prebiotics, found in foods like asparagus, onions, garlic, and slightly underripe bananas, are the food source that probiotics need to survive and colonize in your gut. Without prebiotics, probiotics are like guests arriving at a dinner party where there is no food. They don't stay long. Together, prebiotics and probiotics create a symbiotic effect that is dramatically more powerful than either alone. Number 4, and this is the one that surprises people most in the clinical setting because it is not a food or a supplement, it is a behavior, a daily practice that has direct, measurable, and scientifically validated effects on the gut microbiome and gut lining integrity. Number 4 is chronic psychological stress left unmanaged, and specifically the practice of addressing that stress deliberately through a mind-gut intervention. The gut-brain axis is one of the most fascinating discoveries in modern medicine. Your gut and your brain are in constant bidirectional communication through a network of over 500 million nerve cells lining your digestive tract, more neurons than exist in your spinal cord. Your gut is sometimes called the second brain, and it is not a metaphor. It is an anatomical reality. Research from UCLA's Oppenheimer Center for Neurobiology of Stress found that chronic psychological stress measurably alters gut microbiome composition within 24 hours, reducing the abundance of lactobacillus, one of the most protective and well-studied beneficial bacterial species, by up to 50%. It also directly increases intestinal permeability by triggering the release of a protein called zonulin, which loosens the tight junctions between intestinal wall cells. Think of these tight junctions like the mortar between bricks in a wall. Chronic stress dissolves the mortar, and once the mortar is gone, the wall leaks. For adults over 65, the impact of chronic stress on gut health is compounded by age-related changes in the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which simply means that the stress hormone system becomes less efficient at turning itself off after a stressful event. Younger bodies mount a cortisol stress response and then recover relatively quickly. After 65, that recovery is significantly slower, meaning that gut microbiome disruption from stress lasts longer and goes deeper with each episode. Research from Harvard Medical School's MindBody Institute found that a daily practice of relaxation response techniques, including diaphragmatic breathing, meditation, or progressive muscle relaxation, practiced for just 20 minutes per day, reduced gut inflammation markers and improved intestinal barrier function in adults over 60 within 8 weeks. 8 weeks. That is the timeline for a measurable gut healing response from something that costs nothing and requires no prescription. The practical guidance is to build a daily 20-minute mind-gut practice into your schedule. Diaphragmatic breathing, slow, deep belly breathing that activates the vagus nerve, which is the main communication highway between brain and gut, is the simplest entry point. Breathe in for 4 counts, hold for 2, exhale for 6. The longer exhale is what activates the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest state, that signals your gut to relax, reduce inflammation, and restore barrier function. The synergy tip here is L-glutamine, an amino acid that is the primary fuel source for the cells lining your intestinal wall. Research from the University of Texas Medical Branch found that L-glutamine supplementation at 5 grams per day significantly accelerated the repair of the intestinal lining in adults with increased permeability. Pairing your daily stress reduction practice with L-glutamine supplementation addresses gut healing from both the neurological and the nutritional angle simultaneously. If you are finding this information as important as I believe it is, and if you are over 60 and dealing with any chronic condition, this information is directly relevant to your health, please take 2 seconds right now to hit the subscribe button. Every week, I bring this depth of science-backed guidance specifically for where you are in life. Subscribe, tap the bell, and please like this video. It takes 2 seconds, and it puts this information in front of other seniors who are sitting at home right now without access to it. Number 3 is a dietary strategy that is simultaneously one of the most well-researched gut healing interventions in nutritional science and one of the most consistently underutilized by seniors, and that is dramatically increasing dietary fiber intake, specifically from diverse plant sources, with a particular emphasis on what researchers call resistant starch. Most people know vaguely that fiber is good for digestion. Very few people understand the molecular mechanism through which fiber heals the gut, reduces systemic inflammation, and through those pathways, reduces the risk of some of the most common diseases of aging. Here is the science. When the beneficial bacteria in your colon ferment dietary fiber, especially resistant starch, which is the type of starch found in cooked and cooled potatoes, slightly underripe bananas, legumes, and oats, they produce compounds called short-chain fatty acids. The most important of these is butyrate. Butyrate is the primary fuel source for colonocytes, the cells that line your colon wall. Think of butyrate like premium gasoline for the engine that powers your gut lining. Without adequate butyrate, those lining cells become energy-starved and the intestinal barrier begins to break down. But butyrate does far more than fuel the gut wall. Research from the Salk Institute for Biological Studies found that butyrate directly regulates gene expression in immune cells, shifting them away from an inflammatory state toward a tolerant anti-inflammatory state. It suppresses NF-κB, the same molecular inflammatory switch we discussed in the cancer prevention context, in the gut-associated immune tissue, which comprises approximately 70% of your entire immune system. Healing your gut with fiber-derived butyrate is, in a very literal sense, healing 70% of your immune system. Research from the University of Copenhagen, published in Nature, found that adults who consumed 30 or more different plant foods per week had significantly greater microbiome diversity and measurably lower systemic inflammation compared to those consuming fewer than 10 plant foods per week. 30 different plants per week sounds like a lot, but it includes every fruit, vegetable, nut, seed, legume, grain, herb, and spice. A single meal of vegetable soup with a slice of seeded whole grain bread can contain 10 to 12 plant types easily. After 70, the colon's motility, its ability to move digestive contents through efficiently, slows by approximately 30%, and the population of butyrate-producing bacteria in the gut declines substantially with age. This makes deliberate, consistent fiber intake not just beneficial, but genuinely critical for maintaining gut function and systemic health. I treated a patient named Walter, 76, from Minneapolis, Minnesota, who came to me with type 2 diabetes that had been progressively worsening for 8 years despite oral medications, along with chronic joint inflammation and what his family described as increasing cognitive sluggishness. Walter's diet was fiber poor, white bread, canned vegetables, very little variety. We gradually transitioned him to a diverse plant-rich diet with specific emphasis on daily legumes, cooked and cooled potato salad, and a wide variety of vegetables. Within 4 months, his blood sugar management had improved enough that his endocrinologist reduced one of his medications. His joint pain had measurably decreased, and his family noticed he was sharper and more present in conversations. The practical guidance is to aim for at least 35 grams of diverse dietary fiber daily, including regular resistant starch. Cook potatoes, let them cool completely, then eat them. The cooling process converts regular starch into resistant starch that your gut bacteria can ferment into butyrate. Eat beans or lentils at least 4 times per week. Add ground flaxseed to your oatmeal. The synergy tip is vitamin D, which has been shown in research from the University of California, San Diego, to directly enhance the gut's ability to maintain its mucosal barrier, working synergistically with butyrate to keep the intestinal wall sealed and functional. Adults over 65 are deficient in vitamin D at rates approaching 70%, making supplementation with 1,000 to 2,000 IU daily one of the highest value gut health investments available. Number two is a practice that every single human being reading this already does, or at least tries to do. And yet the specific way most seniors do it is actively working against their gut health in ways that have been documented in peer-reviewed research with striking consistency. I'm talking about sleep, and specifically the way that disrupted, insufficient, or poorly timed sleep devastates the gut microbiome in aging adults. The connection between sleep and the gut microbiome is one of the most recently discovered and rapidly developing areas in gastroenterology and sleep medicine combined. Research from the American Gut Project, one of the largest microbiome studies ever conducted with data from over 10,000 participants, found a direct dose-dependent relationship between sleep quality and microbiome diversity. Adults who consistently slept less than 6 hours per night had microbiome profiles strikingly similar to individuals with confirmed inflammatory bowel disease, even when those short-sleeping adults had no gastrointestinal symptoms whatsoever. Their gut was in a state of measurable crisis that their symptoms had not yet revealed. The mechanism involves circadian rhythm, your body's internal 24-hour clock, and its synchronization with what researchers call the gut clock. Your gut microbiome has its own circadian rhythm. Different bacterial populations are most active at different times of day, coordinating with your digestive cycle, your immune function, and your metabolic processes. When your sleep is disrupted, whether by insomnia, sleep apnea, or simply inconsistent sleep and wake times, the gut clock falls out of synchronization with the brain clock, and the resulting circadian misalignment has been shown in research from the Weitzman Institute of Science to cause significant microbiome dysbiosis, which simply means the balance of beneficial to harmful bacteria shifts unfavorably. After 65, melatonin, the hormone that regulates sleep onset and maintains sleep quality, is produced at approximately 50% of the levels seen in younger adults. This age-related melatonin decline is one of the primary reasons that sleep disruption becomes so prevalent in seniors, and its downstream consequences for gut health are profound and largely unaddressed in mainstream clinical practice. Additionally, sleep is the period during which your gut performs its most intensive repair work. The migrating motor complex, a wave of muscular contractions that sweeps through your intestines during fasting and sleep, clearing debris and bacterial overgrowth, requires uninterrupted sleep to complete its full cycles. Fragmented sleep means incomplete gut cleaning, night after night. The practical guidance is to protect 7 to 8 hours of sleep with the same seriousness you would apply to a medical prescription. Maintain consistent sleep and wake times 7 days a week, even on weekends, to support circadian gut clock synchronization. Keep your bedroom dark, cool, and screen-free. The synergy tip for this strategy is tart cherry juice, which is one of the only whole food sources of melatonin, combined with magnesium glycinate, which relaxes the smooth muscle of both the gut wall and the nervous system simultaneously. 2 ounces of tart cherry juice concentrate and 200 milligrams of magnesium glycinate taken 45 minutes before bed support both sleep onset and overnight gut repair in a way that is gentle, non-habit forming, and backed by solid research from institutions including Louisiana State University and the University of Edinburgh. And now, number 1, the single most powerful thing you can do to heal your gut and through your gut, address the root of most chronic disease. And as I promised, this is the one that the modern food industry has been quietly working against. Not through malice necessarily, but through the systematic replacement of it with processed alternatives that generate far more profit. Number 1 is eliminating ultra-processed foods from your daily diet and replacing them with whole foods in their most natural, recognizable state. I know this sounds less dramatic than a specific supplement or a secret compound. But let me tell you why the science makes this the single most impactful gut intervention available to any adult over 60, and why it is harder to do than it sounds. Ultra-processed foods Defined by the NOVA classification system as foods manufactured with industrial ingredients and additives rarely used in home cooking, including emulsifiers, artificial sweeteners, preservatives, and modified starches, now make up an estimated 57% of the average American adult's caloric intake. For seniors living alone or in assisted settings, that number is often higher. Research from the Institut National de la Santé et de la Recherche Médicale in France, published in the BMJ and following over 100,000 adults, found that a 10% increase in the proportion of ultra-processed foods in the diet was associated with a 14% higher risk of overall mortality, a 9% higher risk of cardiovascular events, and measurable acceleration of cognitive decline. But here is the gut-specific mechanism that makes this number one on our list. Emulsifiers, compounds like carrageenan, polysorbate 80, and carboxymethylcellulose that are added to processed foods to improve texture and shelf life have been shown in research from Georgia State University to directly degrade the mucus layer of the intestinal wall, that protective moat we discussed earlier. Emulsifiers are, at the molecular level, detergents. They dissolve fats and oils, and they dissolve the fat-based mucus layer that protects your gut lining with comparable efficiency. Research from the same team showed that mice-fed emulsifiers at levels comparable to typical human dietary exposure developed measurable gut inflammation, increased intestinal permeability, and metabolic syndrome, the cluster of blood sugar, blood pressure, and weight dysregulation that precedes most chronic disease within just 12 weeks. 12 weeks of eating foods with standard emulsifier levels produced the gut damage that researchers had previously associated with years of poor dietary habits. For adults over 60, whose gut lining is already thinner and whose mucosal regeneration capacity has already declined by an estimated 40%, the impact of regular emulsifier exposure is not theoretical. It is the daily invisible erosion of the primary physical barrier that separates your interior world from the bacterial ecosystem of your gut. A man named Bernard, 79, from Sacramento, California, came to me in a state of significant systemic decline, fatigue that had become disabling, blood sugar completely unmanageable despite 3 medications, joint pain so severe he was considering a wheelchair, and a cognitive fog that his family was beginning to call dementia. Bernard's diet, when we reviewed it in detail, was almost entirely ultra-processed. Packaged cereals, canned soups with long ingredient lists, frozen dinners, processed deli meats, commercial salad dressings, and packaged snacks for every meal and between meals. We stripped his diet back to whole foods over a 6-week transition. Not a dramatic overnight change, but a systematic replacement. Real oats instead of packaged cereal, homemade soups instead of canned, whole fruit instead of packaged snacks, fresh or frozen vegetables with olive oil instead of processed sides. Within 3 months, Bernard's family contacted my office. They said they had their father back. His blood sugar had stabilized to the point where his physician had reduced 2 of his 3 medications. His joint pain had reduced enough that he was walking independently. And the cognitive fog, which multiple physicians had labeled as early dementia, had lifted substantially. His gut had begun to heal, and when the gut heals, everything downstream of it begins to recover. The practical guidance is to read ingredient labels with one simple rule. If you cannot picture the ingredient growing in a field or existing in a kitchen, it belongs to the ultra-processed category and should be minimized. Cook from whole ingredients as often as possible. Batch cook on weekends to make whole food eating accessible on busy days. The synergy tip is extra virgin olive oil used generously in whole food cooking. Research from the University of Navarra found that the polyphenols, protective plant compounds, in high-quality extra virgin olive oil directly support the growth of beneficial gut bacteria, including bifidobacterium and lactobacillus, while suppressing the growth of pathogenic species. Used daily in cooking and as a dressing, extra virgin olive oil is one of the most gut protective fats in human nutrition. Let me bring all 6 of these together now, because what I want you to understand is that gut healing is not one thing. It is a system. Addressing medication timing, adding fermented foods, managing stress through the gut brain axis, increasing diverse dietary fiber, protecting sleep, and removing ultra processed foods. These 6 interventions work on the same organ from 6 different directions simultaneously. Each one is meaningful alone. Together, they create the conditions in which your gut can do what it has always been designed to do: